Try something for a second. Don't say a single word, even in your head, and try to plan tomorrow. Not think about it loosely. Actually plan it. Where you'll go, what you'll do first, what you'll do if it rains. You'll notice something uncomfortable almost immediately. Planning suddenly becomes much harder without words to organize it. Now imagine that being your entire life. Not a thought experiment, the actual, permanent condition of every human being who lived before language existed. That wasn't a short phase. It was most of the story. Our bodies have looked essentially the way they do now for roughly 300,000 years. Exactly when fully modern language emerged is still one of the biggest debates in human evolution. Many researchers place it somewhere between roughly 50 and 100,000 years ago, while others argue parts of it may be much older. Either way, for an enormous stretch of human history, people were living in a hostile world before language reached anything close to the complexity we rely on today. So what were they doing instead? Start with the part that's easy to get wrong. No language did not mean no communication. It meant no verbal language of the kind you and I are using right now. The channels that were left had to work overtime. Gesture almost certainly came first, and it's not speculation dressed up as fact. Every great ape alive today uses gesture flexibly and intentionally, adjusting what they do based on whether another individual is actually watching them. A chimpanzee will wave an arm to request food when a companion is looking, and switch to a physical touch when that companion's back is turned. That's not a fixed reflex. That's a creature reading the situation and choosing the right channel. Since gesture like that shows up across the entire great ape family, researchers generally agree it was almost certainly present in the common ancestor we share with them, which pushes it back millions of years before anything resembling a modern human existed. Add facial expression to that, which is remarkably consistent across cultures with zero contact with each other. Fear, anger, disgust, joy. A study by Paul Ekman in the 1960s found that isolated tribes in Papua New Guinea who had never encountered outsiders read facial expressions from unfamiliar photographs with the same accuracy as people in San Francisco. That's not culture. That's hardware. Somewhere in the deep evolutionary past, the face itself became a broadcast system, readable without a single shared word. Then there's touch, which modern life has almost completely stripped out of daily communication and which likely once did enormous work. A hand on a shoulder saying, "Stay close." A light touch on the arm saying, "Wait." In a small hunting band moving through dense terrain, the difference between a subtle touch and total silence could mean the difference between a coordinated group and one member wandering into a predator's path. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange to sit with. If you don't have language, you don't have it internally either. There's no inner monologue narrating your day, no sentence forming in your head before you speak it. Researchers studying this call it, with a fairly clinical name, unsymbolized thinking. Thought that happens through mental imagery, spatial reasoning, remembered sensation, and emotional pull without ever being translated into words. Most people today still experience flashes of this. The instant, wordless recognition of a face before you consciously think their name. The gut-level sense that a route is wrong before you can explain why. That's the residue of a way of thinking that used to be the entire operating system, not the occasional glitch in a mostly verbal one. And that operating system was doing far more sophisticated work than the phrase unsymbolized thinking makes it sound like. Consider stone tools because they leave physical evidence unlike a thought. Producing a genuinely effective hand axe requires reading the internal structure of a stone, striking it at a precise angle, from a precise distance, with a precise amount of force, then repeating that decision dozens of times in a specific sequence to arrive at a final symmetrical shape. That is not trial and error. That is a plan, held in the mind from start to finish, executed without a single verbal instruction anywhere in the process. Researchers who have tried to learn these techniques from scratch, including experienced modern flint knappers, often need weeks of largely nonverbal, hands-on demonstration before they can reliably reproduce even a basic tool. Words weren't just unnecessary for this. In many cases, they were the wrong medium for the information entirely. You cannot describe the exact feel of a well-placed strike. You have to watch it happen and then feel it happen in your own hands, which raises the actual mechanism nobody thinks about. How did anyone learn anything at all? The answer that keeps showing up across the anthropological record is imitation. One possible explanation comes from what neuroscientists call mirror neurons, brain cells that appear to become active both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform it, although researchers still debate exactly how large a role they play in human learning. A young hominin sitting beside an adult, watching a hand axe take shape stroke by stroke, wasn't just observing. Their brain was likely rehearsing the same movements before ever attempting them. Teaching didn't require a single sentence. It required proximity, patience, and repetition. That same wordless transmission almost certainly extended to fire. Genuinely controlled, deliberately maintained fire use goes back at least 1,000,000 years based on ash layers found at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, discovered generations before anything resembling modern language existed, which means an entire technology, arguably the single most consequential one in the whole of human history, was invented, refined, and passed down for hundreds of thousands of years through nothing but demonstration, correction by physical example, and copying. Someone showed a child which wood caught easily and which didn't. Nobody explained it in a sentence. They demonstrated it over and over until the pattern lodged itself somewhere language-free and permanent. Now think about the social side of that world, because a species that hunts in coordinated groups, shares food deliberately, and cares for injured members over extended periods cannot function purely on gesture and mimicry. There has to be some way to track who is trustworthy. Who has helped you before? Who owes what to whom? Anthropologist Robin Dunbar has argued that before verbal language existed, this social bookkeeping likely ran through physical grooming, not primarily for hygiene, but as a currency of trust. Chimpanzees today spend an enormous portion of their waking hours grooming each other, and the amount of time invested correlates directly with the strength of the social bond involved. It is, in effect, a wordless relationship ledger written directly onto the body instead of spoken aloud. The genuinely uncomfortable question sitting underneath all of this is what a lack of language actually did to the interior experience of being alive back then. And here modern neuroscience offers something close to a natural experiment, even though the comparison has to be handled with real care. Deaf individuals who grow up without access to either spoken or signed language, a condition known as language deprivation, often develop differently from those who receive language early in life. This suggests something important. Language doesn't simply help us describe our thoughts after they happen. It appears to expand the kinds of thoughts we can easily organize and communicate. Abstract ideas, such as justice, the distant future, or another person's intentions become much more difficult to develop and express without a symbolic language system, which means the people who lived before language existed weren't simply humans quietly waiting for words to eventually arrive, patiently filling the time until the real upgrade showed up. They were thinking in a fundamentally different architecture, concrete, sensory, immediate. They likely found certain kinds of abstract thought much harder to construct than we do today, but they were probably far more attuned to physical detail, spatial memory, and split-second nonverbal social reading than most modern humans have ever needed to become. There's a specific irony sitting right at the center of all this, and it's worth pausing on. The tools, the fire, the coordinated hunting strategies, the social trust networks, the migrations that eventually carried our species across the entire planet. Nearly all of it was built and passed forward before anyone could put a sentence together. Language didn't create human intelligence from nothing. It arrived on top of an already sophisticated, already highly capable species, and then dramatically amplified what that species could already do, which leaves an uncomfortable thought worth sitting with as you finish reading this in your head. In fully formed sentences, without even noticing you're doing it. Somewhere in the deep, wordless core of your own mind, underneath every sentence you have ever spoken or thought, that older operating system never actually left. It's still there, running quietly in the background every single time you recognize a face before you can name it, every time you flinch at a threat before you can explain what you saw, every time you simply know something is true before you have found the words to say why. You never fully left that world. You just learned to talk over it.